And when I was at Aldo selling shoes, there was a woman there I worked with, and she became a stripper. And I had thought of it, but I just walked. It was called Cafe Cleopatra, and I was like, well, what do I got to lose? So go in there, and she was working, and then the owner was like, "Hey, you wanna work?" And I was like, I thought, oh, he's gonna bring me in the office. He's gonna like make me get all naked. He's gonna turn me around, check me out. None of that happened, right?
I thought that too, and
Right.
it didn't happen.
Well, it was like, well, you want to show up tomorrow at 4, you can work,
Yeah.
change your mind, no big deal. That's it, really? And so then I started working the next day.
Welcome to the Fearless Living Podcast.
Welcome to the Fearless Living Podcast. I'm Annie Temple, your host. And today I get to interview someone that I really admire from the sex worker activism community and who I actually got to meet in person. I can't believe it's been 2 years now. But 2 years ago at a sex worker conference. And she was actually one of the people who made that thing happen. And it was the most incredible experience of my life. But aside from that, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Sophie. Sophie believes that her sexuality is a source of immense power, one that belongs solely to her. She decides how to express and share it, not society's moral compass or its views on sex. Sophie began stripping in Montreal in the 1990s, a decision that gave her the independence she longed for and needed. She traveled across Quebec and Ontario, eventually ending up in Windsor. Those who judged her at the time said she would regret the choice, but Sophie later realized that her only regret was quitting, not stripping. While she has held many jobs since, stripping was the one that suited her best. Sophie danced during a transformative era in the industry, witnessing the shift from no-touch performances on small wooden boxes to full contact lap dances, a pivotal evolution in the industry. I agree. In her 40s, Sophie returned to sex work as a part-time online content creator for a few years before fully immersing herself in sex work activism, advocating for the right, safety, and recognition of sex workers. She is also passionate about researching the history of strippers, recognizing that the history of sex workers is often missing from archives, and she hopes to fill this gap one day, which I think is very cool. So thank you for being here. Welcome to my podcast, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Annie. It's quite something for me because way back in 2000, I used to admire you with the naked truth. So it is a real honor to be here today. I've been following you a long time.
Ah, thank you. That's so amazing. Yeah, the stripping community in Canada is it's small enough that a lot of us have heard of each other. Like once your name gets out there and starts circulating,
Yeah,
everybody
very
starts to know about you.
true.
So before we get into we're going to do really informal chat today. I didn't come to this discussion with any ideas for questions in advance because every time I've talked to you in the past, I just feel like it really flows naturally. So I feel like we could just chat away. So to start though, could you please describe for our audience a little bit about who you are in your own words?
Well, further to the nice introduction that you did on me there, I spend a lot of my time today mostly as a mother, something that I kind of put on the wayside as I really got wrapped up into my sex work activism. Really got into it during the pandemic. It was really hard not to because we had had an opportunity to have a grant from the Canadian Women's Foundation to help support sex workers in Alberta, and there hadn't been any organization in Alberta at that time that were led by sex workers for sex workers. So basically did the work that needed to be done to start a society. It took us 6 months, and then we got started in November of 2020, and then it was a complete whirlwind until about October of last year, at which point, unfortunately, I was completely burnt out. But I have no regrets. We had a very unique opportunity to support so many sex workers, and they were often left out of the discussions during the pandemic. I know that so many were affected, but so are sex workers, and especially with the nature of their work, many very close proximity. And they needed support just like anybody else. So yeah, right now I'm kind of working on reclaiming a bit of my life, and especially as a mom to my children, and also with my health. I have to, my health kind of paid a price there for a few years. I do have Crohn's disease, and I needed to start nurturing myself back to a good level of health that worked for me. So really investing in that, but also I do plan to have more space in my future, and it's really going to be more about archiving and some more sex work activism as well.
Oh, wow. You said so much that I can relate to. So much. The whole like as a human being who has so many things that you feel and want to do and want to express and make a difference and impact people, and coming from our experience as sex workers, the whole activism. I want to say activism. A lot of people view activism as, oh, we're fighting for rights, but activism a lot of the time for you and I has meant just providing health and safety supports to sex workers, specifically finding ways to make them live healthier, safer lives. And that is so rewarding. And then on top of it, you've got a family. And it can't help but get out of balance because you're responding to really urgent things all the time. And it's just like a person who works in business or runs their own company. But as mothers, we're really not, uh, I mean, we're stigmatized for focusing on something outside of our family. So it's not even just our own guilt because our kid we should be spending more time with our kids, but it's also society making us feel bad. And so it's just like a double whammy, I feel like. And then health stuff on top of it. Ah, like
Oh,
God, I
absolutely.
just feel you, woman. I feel you.
Oh, yeah, you really nailed it there. Because I think too, in relationships too, right? There's a bit of that expectation again of the woman taking on more roles on the home front, and there's only so much time in a day. Like I found myself starting to work at 6 in the morning and then finishing at midnight, and that was like my ordinary life. And there's only so much of that anybody can do. And I think that for sex work activism, it's also very different than other types of activism, like you've pointed out. I've been involved with activism around the privatization of healthcare. I've been involved in activism with lowering tuition hikes. I've been involved in activism in terms of the environment. And I thought all those are really difficult. But then when it came to sex work, I don't think anything in my experience has topped the challenges that you're faced as a sex work activist compared to other types of activism, which is heavily because of the stigma that is so heavy and present in this type of activism versus the others.
For sure. The censorship.
Yes, that
The
too.
censorship is so
Oh,
huge.
yeah.
The financial exclusion. Like we can't fund, it's difficult to fundraise. It's difficult to earn any kind of income outside of sex work once you've been in it because like me, for instance, trying to sell my books on my website, I can't. Just because my subject matter is about sex work, even though I'm not selling sex through my website at all. I still can't sell my books there. I can't sell my webinars, nothing, because none of the financial platforms will provide uh, that portal, the payment portal for me. They refuse me based on my content, and my book's banned in some places in the United States. It's so crazy.
Oh, it's awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. And this is why people need to really understand that what is so harmful is the criminalization of sex work, right? It's that criminality aspect that's becoming such a barrier for you right now, right?
Yeah.
And that really needs to be driven home, I think, a lot in society. It's not legal, it is criminalized. And there's a
Hmm.
huge price to pay, huge for that.
Oh, for sure. And the whole like idea that these laws are helping anyone. that needs to be smashed. That is just such a bunch of bullshit. When you talk to people who are actually being sexually exploited, they will be the first ones to say that the current laws are just pushing it further underground and making it harder for people to help them.
Oh, yeah.
Like clients show up to a sketchy place and they think someone's being abused. Well, how do they report that? They are criminalized in Canada. It's just ridiculous.
This brings just a little thought in my head, a little story to share. It's a little different, but just I found this really bizarre. And there's a lot of these, like you're explaining with the book. It's just very bizarre what we're faced with. So um, a few years ago, well, actually, this is before 2020. So when I had a bit more time, I used to research the history of stripping and sex workers. And I was on eBay and I was trying to find like old photos or old negatives of strippers. They're actually really hard to find. Like a lot of
Mm.
people just toss them. Like there's been so many strip club owners who've just tossed everything, like nothing's been kept. And I found these photos of these strippers in the 70s and 80s and 90s in Montreal being posted. I was like, oh my, this is a gold mine. So I, of course, wanted to bid on it. I couldn't. I couldn't bid on it. Canadians at that time could not buy any type of content on eBay that had to do with any nudes. So this Canadian content could be bought by Americans, and it largely was. But we couldn't buy that content. I was
Mhm.
furious. So of course I started like emailing the person who was selling it, being like, "Hey, is there any way that I could buy your leftovers, anything?" And the beauty actually in that story, because that was the more negative part, the beauty is we actually did become friends, and I
Oh,
was able
nice.
to purchase, and not only purchase these photos but learn about their stories. He would share them with me. But
Wow.
I just wanted to share that how weird it felt that this Canadian content Canadians can buy, and it made no sense, and here it was just trying to preserve our history. So
Yeah, it is so weird. It's like I feel like how is my life story banned? This makes no sense to me. This is
no.
this is the banning of might as well be the burning of books. And it's opposite of free speech. Like it's so insane to me that our society is getting worse, not better in that way. Like we're getting less freedom, not more freedom. And when people don't recognize that sex workers are the guinea pigs, we are always the first ones to be oppressed in some way. And so first they take away our rights. And it's kind of like their blueprint, and then they take everyone's rights. And it's historically been that way, and they're doing it now. Even like with the whole COVID thing, sex workers were vectors of disease forever. But then during COVID, everyone was vectors of disease. You know what I mean? Like it's just crazy though, but how the mind control thing can happen and how it's just always starts with the marginalized communities, not always sex workers. It could be immigrants, it could be but people who can't get help because of stigma or criminalization, or for whatever reason they can't actually go through the usual channels that people would go through when they're being discriminated against in these ways.
Oh yeah, so well said. Yeah.
Mm. So stripping, tell me about your experience. Like, can you tell me why, how you got into it, or like what your whole story there was?
Absolutely. So when I was younger, I had a whole bunch of. I'll try to not make this too long, but I'll.
No worries.
It's hard to not provide a little context to before I started stripping. So
Yeah.
I was a very high energy little person, and my mom didn't know what to do with me, so she put me in all these sports because I was climbing up the walls, and so I really put most of my energy into gymnastics. So I was a gymnast for 10 years, and when our family moved from Edmonton to Montreal, I was 13. And I started losing energy. I was going to gymnastics and I couldn't keep up with everybody. And I really thought there was something wrong with me. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, why can't I
Mhm.
keep up with everybody? And so I spent about a year, and I became really white, not like just
Mm.
pale, pale, pale. And my grandmother actually was the one who had seen a family photo, and she's like, she had been a nurse at one point in her life, and she's like, something's up with Sophie. Like I can just tell by looking at her, something's up with her. So went to go get a gamut of tests. I went to the Children's Hospital, then I went to Saint-Justine Hospital in Montreal. And after all the probing and tests, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was 14.
Mm.
And I was in and out of hospitals for months at a time, for years. I ended up getting 2 bowel resections. They're trying to figure out what's going to work. You know, they put you on all these steroids and all these different medications, and just dealing with the side effects of that as a teenager was just really hard for me, because puberty was already hard, and then put the steroid side effects. Oh, it was a mess. And so I had to quit gymnastics, and then of course I had to work. I didn't come from a super wealthy family at that time, and I was a gymnastics coach for a while, but then I got fired because I can always show up. I started selling shoes at Aldo's, and then I was fired. There was this pattern in my life where, because I wasn't a reliable worker, I kept getting fired. And it was so discouraging when you're a young child going into adulthood. And, you think you're already so intimidated by becoming an adult and responsible, all these things, but then this huge barrier becomes this incredible challenge in your life. And like, even in school, like often during my like midterms and finals, I would get hospitalized because it's so stressful. And I'm like, it didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I'm trying to go to school to better my future. Like everything was just so confusing, but I can't even make it through a semester without being hospitalized. And then of course you're in these big classes and you're just a number. And I always felt like I was guilty until proven innocent. Like, are you sure you were sick? Are you sure you weren't partying or whatever? Right. That kind of looming thing. And I didn't have, at that time, I think I was just super confused. I was mad. I was frustrated. I wasn't getting along with my parents. And I don't know whether I was kicked out of my home or ran away. I will do slash, ran away slash. And basically, I was on the streets of Montreal for a few nights on St. Catherine Street, not knowing, like I was suicidal. I didn't know. Like I was just like, there was no hope, and I didn't know what my next opportunities were going to be in life. And when I was at Aldo selling shoes, there was a woman there I worked with, and she became a stripper. And I had thought of it, but I just walked. It was called Cafe Cleopatra, and I was like, well, what do I got to lose? So go in there, and she was working, and then the owner was like, hey, you want to work? And I was like, I thought, oh, he's going to bring me in the office. He's going to like make me get all naked. He's going to turn me around, check me out. None of that happened, right?
I thought that too.
Right?
But it didn't happen.
Well, it was like, well, you want to show up tomorrow at 4, you can work, change your mind, no big deal. That's it, really? And so then I started working the next day, and I remember my first day.
Were you underage? Sorry for interrupting.
No, I was just 18, but I looked so young that every time cops came in, they always carded me. I had quite the baby face back then. And my first time on stage, still remember, I did such a horrible choice for my third song. It was Erotica by Madonna. Like, who does that on their first set? Like, my knees were shaking so much. I'm already so nervous to be up there. I couldn't even walk on my third set, which in retrospect was probably okay. I was just crawling around. What am I thinking? Anyways, that night I remember making $100, and everybody, like, it just, what blew my mind was that it was nothing that I had thought. It was nothing, all the images and beliefs that I had around a strip club and how you were treated and how it all worked was completely false.
Yes.
I had people just paying me to even just talk, just to chat. Everybody was respectful. There was nothing negative in my experience other than feeling overly nervous. And then I could show up when I wanted. I could leave when I was sick. I could make money. Like, how is this not a good option for me? Like it just, it felt so right for where I found myself in life. And when I started dancing was on little wooden boxes for $5 a song. And I carry them on top of my head from customer to customer. And
what year was that? Do you know? Do you remember?
It was 1994.
Oh my God. Yeah. You started dancing like 3 years before me. I started in 97, but we didn't have boxes out here. Out here, it was all stage. I'm in BC, and that was in Montreal. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Out here, it was all stage, and just in 1997, the year that, like maybe at the end of 1996, they had just started at only a handful of clubs having private shows. And so I was one of the first private dancers in the Lower Mainland. That's how I made my money, was private shows to come to start working on stage, because I had to get costumes and music and everything to work on stage. But yeah, that's such a good story. Oh my God, I relate so much to everything you just said. I totally did not like, because I went to university before I started dancing, and I'd been in women's studies classes, and it was very, very like second wave feminism, uh, uh, pushed ideology around the sex industry and how it perpetuates rape culture, and that, people who work in the industry are like basically traitors to women, and you know what I mean? And how degraded and exploited people are who are in the industry, and they're all, they all have daddy issues and like everything else. Like it was crazy. I believed all that. And then when I started, I was just so amazed at how empowered I felt, and how I started to feel equal to people, not inferior. I'd felt inferior before I started dancing. Now that I was dancing, I started to feel equal to people. Like suit and tie guys before I started dancing made me nervous. I was like, oh my God, who are these professional people? And then dancing made me realize that they treated me like I had the power, and I started to feel equal to all of them. And then also just meeting men in power that were really stupid and thinking like, I'm more intelligent than this guy, and he's like a head of a multi-million-dollar company, or and I'm like, how did this happen? But then it opens your mind, because it makes you think, wow, what am I capable of? But this guy probably got the job through his brother-in-law or something, you know what I mean? But like, it's still just like made me uh see things so differently, but in an empowering way, not in the way that I expected.
I can really relate to that a lot. And also, when you put a whole bunch of guys together, back then it was mostly guys. I think that now, there's a lot of
Yeah.
different people who go to strip clubs, but, they don't have their wives around, their mothers. Like they're just pretty honest, right? They'll
Hmm.
tell you things that they won't necessarily tell other people. But
For
what
sure.
you're also saying about just seeing people in a different light, yeah, absolutely. I learned so much about the world and life, and through the customers too. Like most of them, I really appreciate and enjoy having conversations for them and
Hmm.
dancing for them. I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it less than like I've worked in retail and worked customer service, and you'll always have some disgruntled customers, no matter what service you're providing. But I
Yes.
guess the point I'm trying to make is that in strip clubs, it wasn't like there were way more than you would find at customer service in a retail shop, right?
Yeah.
Most of them are kind and fun, and you get to learn a lot from them. Yeah, so
Totally. I would say in the strip club, more of the customers are kind and friendly and respectful than in a retail or other type of job, honestly. But the opposite, the really shitty customers in the strip club, they tend to be vulgar and disgusting and like, oh, drunk. Whereas in a retail or other situation, it's usually more rudeness or, criticism or like condescension, I think.
that's true. I also find that some of those men too, that they just feel like they're so much more superior than you.
Hmm.
Not always something you would find in retail customer service, but that you can really feel in a strip club, right? Like,
Yeah, because those really misogynist types, like that misogyny does exist. And the opposite. There are women who hate men too, and a lot of them self-identify as feminists. I hate to say it, but it is a thing. And certainly men who hate women, a strip club is a great place to go where they can kind of vent that energy. And that's why I think a lot of strippers do get really jaded, because even if 97 to 99% of their customers are sweet and respectful, that 1 to 5% or whatever that are vulgar, drunk, condescending, arrogant, misogynist assholes, they really put your walls up, because you got to have them up in that kind of situation. You're surrounded by people, and any of them could be that guy, you
it's
know. But
true.
at the same time, I mean, b- pre like I when I first entered the industry, I was very impacted by my training in feminism, and I looked at my customers with a lot of, contempt, to be honest. And it wasn't until I started to give myself permission to love my job, enjoy my job, not see it as the exploitative industry that I had been conditioned to believe, and gave myself permission to actually care about my customers. Then I started to expand my love for not only my customers, but just men in general. And then I became a much better mother when I had a son. You know what I mean? Like I'm glad that this industry enabled me through the literature, honestly, through the activists that came before us. Their literature really opened up my mind and led me to a place where I have a lot more understanding, love, and compassion for men. Would you
Yeah.
say that you feel the same way, or?
I would say that I definitely, through the experiences of having all those customers, just saw them in a different light than I had
Mhm.
before I started. Absolutely, hands down.
Mhm.
But I think that what you're saying resonates a lot with me. And one of the things that you said about giving yourself permission, I think that something that I never gave myself permission was to be the best stripper that I could be.
Mhm. Me neither, honestly. Me neither. I just saw it as a job.
Yeah,
I
and I just
That's
didn't
it.
allow myself, like I could have excelled. I had a
Mhm.
gymnastic background, like
Right?
I could have invested in the costumes and done a lot of the shows. Like I loved the art of seduction, like
Mhm.
really like just looking at people in their eyes and just like as you're dancing and just like that energy, like that
Mhm.
tease. Like it's just such a nice thing a beautiful thing to cultivate and nurture. But yeah, I always felt a certain amount of shame,
Yeah.
and it never allowed me to like use my money to go travel, for example. Like I
Mhm.
felt like, oh, if I'm making this money, I have to use it for like my tuition, buying a car, for my rent, for my
Oh.
investments. Like, how dare I can't go use it to like buy something really nice or go on this nice trip. And that's
Mhm.
something I regret.
Yeah.
I understand why I limited myself and didn't give myself that permission to be that the best stripper I could be.
Mhm.
And
Internalized oppression.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
really what it
definitely.
is. And that's why I say that a lot of feminism is the oppression of women in the name of feminism. It's women oppressing women in the name of feminism because we're taught to feel ashamed of of our job, and it's so hard to break out of that if we don't have somebody or some other input to show us that there's another way of thinking, another way of believing, another way of seeing this and viewing this and perceiving what I do. But if you've only had this one idea presented to you and it's been presented in a conditioning manner, it's like we're brainwashed, and that's why it's internalized oppression. We're internalizing the shame that other people are putting on us, which is really shitty because we have the power in our own minds to decide what we accept about ourselves and what we don't accept. But even that we don't get taught. We don't even get
No,
taught that, you
no,
know?
absolutely. And something I was proud about that I have no regrets was that because I was pretty isolated. My family, my parents had disowned me. A lot of my friends didn't associate with me anymore. And I was forced to kind of face all of this alone. And
Mhm.
it is through that facing all that alone that I actually really fell in love with myself.
Yes, that's
I think
beautiful.
that's the best way to put it. I, I, because it was circumstantial, I had to do that work, but I like the end results. Like
Hmm.
after that, it was like I felt so strong on my own. I didn't need anybody. Like I
Yes.
felt like as you're growing up in the world, you're dependent. You need people, and that the transitioning from being a child to an adult, right? Again, it's intimidating and all these things, and not very confident. But at the end, I had that. That was a gift that it gave
Yes.
me. I had that strength, that confidence, and that self love where I didn't need anybody. So that carried me through up to today, and probably will be with me until I die. And for that, I'm super grateful.
That's a paradigm shift. You experienced like a spiritual paradigm shift where, uh, and that is why, like, I don't want to insult people who are stuck in their trauma. I understand that. But I also feel that we shouldn't be encouraging a victim mentality, because it is honestly the hardest experiences of our lives that carve us into the people that we are today. And so they can carve us into people who are triggered and in constant pain and view the world as a horrible place, or they can carve us into people who say, oh my God, look how fucking strong I am.
Yeah.
Look what I survived by myself on my own with little to no help. And how I think now, I went from this person who wanted to kill myself, walking the streets alone in Montreal. I'm just like
Yeah.
your
Oh,
story,
yeah.
to feeling like I love myself and I know who I am and I feel confident in who I am. And that journey was through the sex industry.
Yeah.
And so
Like,
how can people just blanket say that it's bad for us, Like,
oh, I know. And this is why, and this will probably be the activism that I will be most dedicated to until I pass away, because I really do believe that this in my heart is one of the hardest and most important. And it's something that um, I had an interesting conversation with my mom about 2 months ago. So my mom and we don't really talk about sex work very much.
I
She
neither.
I know that she carries a lot of shame
Mhm.
for what I do. I think that she's grown to still try to respect me as a person and not let it define me in her eyes, which I
Mhm.
really appreciate and respect her. But we spoke one night, and I had opened up to her about my stripping days, a little bit how like I'm doing today.
Mhm.
And she was so tired, but her eyes were just so wide, and we spoke till 2 or 3 in the morning. And what I realized, which I hope she realized, was that we're actually on the same side.
Mhm.
She just doesn't realize it. She's like, oh, these men should never be taking advantage of these women and
Yeah.
exploiting them and trafficking them. And she wants, she's actually a real strong feminist at heart, but she thinks that I'm feeding that, right? And so I
Mhm.
had to explain like the empowerment and how much control I had, and like how
Mhm.
I've been much more exploited on a dance floor in a bar with clothes on than I was in a strip club, and giving her all. And I think I'm hoping I gave her something to think about, but it's just, I think a lot of us, if we just took the time to listen to one another, like truly, especially if this isn't your experience, to really open your heart and your mind to listen,
Mhm.
I think we would realize that we have a lot more in common. And that we are on the same side, and that we want to protect femininity and our power and the beauty, that it holds.
Mhm.
We're just going about it different ways, but the end goal is actually the same. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So,
I felt that way about my mother too. I felt like my mom would put on music and we would dance sexy together when I was like 12, 13, and she would encourage me to look pretty and accentuate my femininity and stuff, because she thought that I was insecure because I didn't notice boys looking at me, and she took me to get glasses and like so she was never like she was a feminist, but she was never like anti femininity or feeling good about your sexiness or your femininity. And when she talked about like men and relationships and sex, she would say things like, you never need a man. There's sex shops for that, and don't marry the first man you sleep with. Like, so she said all these things, and then she was so surprised when I became a stripper, which I'm like, I'm so much more like you than you realize. Like, you raised me, maybe it was like your actions more than your words that impacted me, because maybe you don't even know what you really believe, mom. you know
yeah.
But I think a large part of it was exactly like you say, that they feel ashamed of us, and they're internalizing that oppression. They're internalizing that shame because it's been conditioned into us, and the only way to unravel that. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with my prolific social media presence, is to just have these conversations, get these conversations out there, get people talking about sex and erections and impotence and, intimacy and like empowerment in the sex industry, things that we're mostly aren't allowed to talk about, or if even if we are, people are scared to talk about it.
Society is so lucky to have you, Annie. Like
Oh,
having those conversations is they're not easy, and they do require a certain level of energy, and you're just putting so much out to the universe right now, right? Like, yeah, it's yeah.
yeah, but honestly, like I'm like you, with the health and the activism and work and trying to provide for my family and take care of my family. Right now, my children are getting into their own lives. I have two adult children. They don't even live with me anymore. They live in their own places. And then I have one that's still home with me, and she's 13, and she is the baby. So I still do way too much shit for her. I'm like, no, make your own fries. Start your own shower. Like she knows how to do it, but because I've been doing it for so long, she'd rather just let me do everything for her. But she still is very independent. And so now it's freeing up time for me. And then my recent surgery, getting an ostomy, has really helped with my health. So I'm not feeling as tired and sick and like in constant management mode like I
Oh,
was before.
yeah.
So that has given me some extra energy. And now I'm like, now nothing can stop me. I'm until death stops me, or health. Like the day of my book launch, I got so sick I was hospitalized. Like I know what you're talking about. Like when you have chronic health issues, stress triggers it. It makes it so much worse, and it can just like wreck but then because you've been through this crazy roller coaster of life, don't you find that when something that would devastate someone else happens to you, that you can really take it in stride because it's not that important? Like for me, like when I was so sick, I couldn't even arrive at my book launch. All I could think, what matters is I stay alive for my children, because I was so sick that day, that I actually had to go to the hospital, and I won't go unless I'm dying.
Right? It changes our perspective of what we think about in those situations. I wholeheartedly understand. And it grounds me to just think of like the most important things. Like, is this really that important that I need to stress or hide? Or like, I love your
Mhm.
openness, you just call it how it is. Look, listen, my
Yeah.
health today, like this has happened, and it's just a fact, and it's just like anything else. And I love how it's just, yeah, like it's
Yeah. But I
normal.
mean, years ago when it first started, I would have been devastated, embarrassed, like uh I would have probably cried for days. I would have felt so sorry to everyone that was impacted. And now I think this is so small because of everything I've been through. This is not life or death, And if it's not life or death, then we're going to be okay.
Can I ask what year you were diagnosed, or how long ago?
You know, all of my health issues started after a vaccine injury in 2008.
Okay.
I had the Hep A B shot because I was working in transition houses, and I had a really severe, horrible reaction to it. It basically destroyed my intestines, my large intestine specifically. And so that just started years and years. It was in 2012. So that was 4 years later that I had a sudden emergency surgery for a bowel perforation that we don't know how it happened, but that is increasingly happening to people. And I think it's from our toxic foods, our toxic medications, and just a toxic environment. So when that happened, that really got things going downhill even faster, because then I had to get a lot of medicalization, and like you say, the side effects. And for me, side effects of all the antibiotics, all of the surgeries, all of the pain meds, everything, the hospital food, which is not for your health, like
Yep,
all
that's
that shit.
that one.
Um, it all accumulated in my body, and I developed severe arthritis in every joint in my body, and I couldn't even move. Like I was basically just watching other people live their lives and trying to survive for my children. It was that bad. So I just but that was when they diagnosed me with Crohn's, was after they took 75% of my large intestine. But I'd been having intestinal problems, bleeding, blood in my stools, and all that kind of stuff, like for since the pharmaceutical injury in 2008.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
But like I feel like whenever anyone has any kind of like sudden illness that comes on, that they should try to look at, did they recently get a vaccine? Did they recently take a medication? Because doctors don't know how toxic these things are, you know? And so if you can if you can identify a cause, then sometimes you can heal from it,
Yeah.
because then you
Oh,
can detoxify from the pharmaceutical, or if there's some kind of natural cure for whatever it is, you know, like Lyme disease, for instance, or something like that, you know?
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Those are good points. And one of the reasons I was asking too was for myself, I found that it took me 10 years. It took me 10 years from the time I started getting sick to the time where I was like, okay, I got life again. You know, like
Mhm.
just that
Yes.
transition, because it is a new body. You
Yes.
like when, especially when it's sudden like that, like it was pretty sudden
Yes.
for you, and you're given a new body, like, and you have to mourn the old and accept the new and try to figure out how this new body works in this world, and especially in
Totally.
capitalism, which is you got to show up and be on time most of the time.
Yeah.
um,
Oh, I could so relate to you saying you couldn't keep a job. Like when I finally gave up on jobs, I had my boss at the transition house tell me, well, you know what? I'm really glad that because I resigned. I told her I'm too sick to work anymore. I'm sorry. I'm constantly in the hospital. I've got to let this job go. I was scared she was going to fire me anyway. And she said, I'm really glad you said that, because looking at your absence record, and you have 60% absence rate. Like, you know, people can't run an organization or a business with an employee that can't show up. And when you're sick, and then they give you such a pitiful amount of money to live on, like if you are dependent on the government, that
oh,
there's no possible way to survive or to take care of your family with it.
no.
So it's just
Oh
like,
yeah,
what
that's
the
a
fuck do you
whole other
expect us to do? Obviously, we're going to become sex workers or whatever else other people choose, but we have to find a way to survive, you know?
Well, exactly. You know, given the parameters, you got to figure it out. You know, it's hard, but you got to figure it out. Like, you don't have a choice to live in a different type of society. This is the society we're born in. Got to, you know.
Totally.
But if I could say one thing about my experience, I'm just going to little awareness on this fact that I feel everybody with a chronic illness that was diagnosed as a child, um, it's really important for other people to know this. I have worked with every MP. Mine currently is Randy Boissonneau, and he hasn't done anything about this, unfortunately. But every MP that I have had in my life since I was a child, I have brought up this up. And what it is that when you're diagnosed with a chronic illness as a child, your parents receive money from the federal government because
Really?
you are a person who has a chronic illness that is not curable and affects your life. So they received that money, I think from the age I was 15 to 18. Once I was 18, it was cut off. So that's through the federal government. Now, provincially, you cannot get any type of disability amount if you're in school, if you're not living with your parents. They have all these really, really strict rules.
Mhm.
So that wasn't an option. Federally, the biggest obstacle, which is not fair, is that in order to get disability as an adult, you have to pay into CPP for 4 years out of a 6 year period in order to qualify. Anybody who has been diagnosed as a child in this country did not qualify. They fall through those cracks. So they don't have
Yeah.
that safety net. Maybe if I did, when I did my transition there, if I had more help, you know, maybe I wouldn't have went into stripping. I have no regrets that I did. But this is where people who are trying to understand, like, oh, you know, like, well, you could, you know, you had all other options, or you did have support or whatever. No, I didn't, you know, and
Mhm.
this part is very unfair. Now, I know that they probably don't want to go fix this because it would cost them a hell of a lot of money, but it's just not
Mhm.
fair. It is
No,
not
it's
fair.
not.
I had my mom's cousin who's very dear to me. She was diagnosed in her 30s, and she had worked 4 years at a 6 year period. She is still receiving money from the government to this
Mhm.
day on disability. And it's not like she had Crohn's much worse than me or anything like that. We have the same type of Crohn's that affects
Yeah.
our lives in the same type of way. But she gets
Mhm.
to have that support because she did work for 4 years out of a 6 year period and pay into CPP.
Mhm.
And as we know, a lot of strippers or sex workers or independent contractors, you have to go out of your way to pay into that. You're not
Yeah.
automatically paying into that. So
That's it.
after my career of sex work, I still couldn't apply because I hadn't paid 4 years out of a 6 year period. So anyway, I had to promote a little awareness about that because hopefully that will get fixed one day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And because I had worked 4 years out of a 6 year period, I'm on CPP disability, and it's less than what they give people on social assistance disability, which is weird.
Yeah.
You're also allowed to earn more every year on social assistance disability than you are
Ooh,
on CPP disability. If I earn more than $5,500 in a year, they'll cut me off. Yes.
that's
So
dysfunctional too.
so I mean, yeah, like it'll probably last until I am old and getting into like retirement age and all that. Uh I really hope that I can build some kind of business that is so massive that I am so freaking rich that I can like pay for your fucking house.
You're on
You know
your
what I
way.
mean?
You're on your way. I'm telling you.
Like that's my goal, that I won't have to be dependent on the government in my
Yeah.
old age or on disability for the rest of my life. But I mean, like we don't know what's going to happen. We can only try, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. The system is really, really broken, and the amount of people who have addiction is so unbelievably high, and they all are on disability. They're all on disability. None of them can work. So our government is supporting everyone, but they're not doing much to help people overcome their addictions or their disabilities or their situations. You know, for instance, for me as a mother, when a single mother, when I was in subsidized housing, that was the best for me and my family, the best, because we could actually afford our groceries every month and I could be present with my children. But there isn't enough subsidized housing out there for all the single mothers who are disabled or who are, who can't have young children or anything. There's so many things that could be done that aren't being done, and where the money's going is so ridiculous. Like I don't know that I'm against capitalism so much, but I'm against a corrupt political system that takes our taxes by force and uses it for things that don't actually benefit us. So that I do have a problem with, but in terms of allowing people to work hard to make money, I love that. But I also feel that people who are sick and disabled or have young children and can't work should have support systems, and there should be a balance there, but
It's very broken. Like just even hearing what you're saying too, right? Like putting barriers and not encouraging you to become successful, right? That's what it's kind of doing. Like that's not okay. You want these people to grab any opportunity and not feel like they might risk losing
Mhm.
their disability money. And maybe like that safety net could still be there for them. Maybe they make more money 1 month and maybe they got a bit less, but they're not disqualified right away, right? Like,
Mhm.
but I've heard like quite a few stories. I mean, you're adding to it as well. It is not enough for people and
Mhm.
it needs to be revamped. Absolutely. Um, and I
And
hope that
also, like, as my children age out, I get less and less, right, from the government.
yeah.
So then I will essentially be let's say I don't do anything to work and all I do is depend on the government, like a lot of people do. Um, as my kids age out, I will be left with such a small amount of money that it won't be enough to pay my rent, never mind my rent and my food. I'll have to move into probably a bedroom in someone's house. I won't be able to have my children over for dinners. I won't be able to have the kind of life that, or provide the kind of support to my children as very young adults that other parents would be able to provide, because you just can't. But yeah, like definitely disability and health is a huge broken part of our system, and a big, I think there are a lot of sex workers who are disabled.
Oh, there are like when we did the conference there, we had that. I mean, it was over 100 sex workers who had filled out a survey that we had. Again, it was people who had access to the internet. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah,
perfect survey by any
yeah.
means, but it was about 76% of people. And I mean, we've seen it in other studies too, right? Or close to 80 people who identified with having some sort of health issue that they are dealing with on an ongoing basis,
And it makes sense because it's one of the only options we have, and they say how the even transgender people are overrepresented in the sex industry because it's one of the only options that they have. Like, and then people are actively trying to take away our options, and they don't understand why they're hurting us and why people are being, you know, put into poverty and even murdered and dangerous situations, because when you take away the only options we have, we get pretty freaking desperate,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
ridiculous.
we all have to eat. We all got to try to put a roof over our head if we can, like
Mhm.
everybody has those needs. I think that we can agree on that.
For sure.
They don't go away.
Oh, I can't believe time has just
No.
flown by talking to you. I think we should do a 2-hour chat next time.
No, because we didn't even get to any of the activism
We
stuff.
didn't even
I
talk
feel the
about
same
like
way.
activism or what else we missed out. But you know what? Honestly, this has been such an important discussion because I feel like a lot of people, especially in our industry, are going to identify with and relate to a lot of what we talked about today.
I agree.
And
Absolutely.
I'll
Yeah.
have to bring you back to talk about all the other subjects.
Oh, sounds good. I love to. I love chatting with you.
Oh, the feeling is mutual. Can you tell our guests how to get in touch with you if they want to ask you a question or follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Instagram. I haven't been super active, but just know that I do check my inbox and I do hope to be active again, like maybe in the next year. So it's Bearing It. So it's BARING.IT. Yeah, so you can see some of the posts I've done in the past of where I have posted some stuff with about strippers in the past, my archiving that I've delved into. And again, we'll plan to continue that in the future.
That's amazing. Oh my God. I have to go and check it out more closely now that you told me kind of what you're doing. And honestly, take the time you need. I've been in sex work activism since 2004, so that's 20 years now. Or no, 2000, I guess, because that's when I started the Naked Truth. So 24 years now. And I've had to leave for years at a time, either for health or for mental health. And I've had to like take my name off listservs because it's just I just can't handle the stress of reading everybody's shit. And I really, I am proud of you for doing what you need to do for your health and your family. And, just enjoy. I know I don't have to tell you this, but, enjoy every moment that you can,
Oh, I
because
appreciate
when your energy is back and you're raring to go again, then you're going to have to try to balance it all again.
And I will. I will. Absolutely. I really appreciate your words. They are encouraging. It's not always an easy place to be, but yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
let it go. The sex worker community will always be here for you when you come back.
Oh, thank you. Thank
I
you.
love you.
Me too. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. Thanks to all the listeners.
I'm Annie Temple, the erotic entrepreneur. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much.